on Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Gerald Everett Jones, author of Jonathan's Journal. Welcome, Gerald.
Thank you, Terry. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I just came off the LA Festival of Books, and boy, it's a good thing I'm not hoarse.
Not
a horse either.
Not a horse, but yeah. No, I'm sure that's got to be exhausting. I just got done with a 2-week writer's retreat, and so it's kind of hard to get back into the swing. It was like for 2 weeks, I was nothing but a writer. I didn't have to do any of the other things, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah,
you got you got a stack of business cards. Oh no, these days what you've got is you've got all those QR code.
Yes, seriously, absolutely. Well, Gerald, I really enjoyed your book, but before we dive into it, can you give my listeners just a quick idea of what they're going to find when they open up the cover of Jonathan's Journal?
Absolutely. This is my 15th novel. And I used to write a lot of business and technical books, and I had an agent for that. And then I guess it was about 15 years ago, I said, well, I think I really want to concentrate on fiction. I've been doing screenplays, and I've been doing some novels, but I'd really like to concentrate. Have a nice life, kid. So I was an early adopter of indie publishing. Even print on demand was before ebooks, before Kindle even. So I've been doing it all, with my own imprint since then. Authors, and so I do some mentoring, I do some coaching, and it's like, if they say, help me query agent, I say, do you really want to wait 2 years before your book comes out? Even if you're lucky?
More than that.
Well, and then once you have a publisher, time on the shelf, because the publisher is going to take, they're not going to turn your book formatting around in 2 weeks. It's going to take 2 years from the point they say yes. It's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. So Jonathan's here's my main message about Jonathan's is I've learned a thing or two about book promotion myself. Okay. And it is bloody hard to publicize, stimulate a marketplace with fiction. It's easier with genre fiction, and it's bloody difficult with literary fiction.
Absolutely.
I have written romantic comedy. I have written mystery thrillers. Both of those series have won awards individually and as series. And I have written literary fiction as well, also award-winning. This is only my second historical novel. Historical novel writing is also bloody difficult. Okay, it's a lot of research. I had a small army of it. This is a World War I story. I had a small army of interns helping me research this. I found in my mother's collectibles, after her passing, a red leather-bound, gilt-edged, elegant, handwritten journal in old-fashioned India ink calligraphy. Gorgeous. So somebody paid a calligrapher to copy this book. Okay. It is a World War I soldier's diary from 1919, and this fellow did not give his name, only his initials. And nowhere in the diary, which I finally got into after I could ask her questions, nowhere does he give you any real clues as to who he is. Now, he was from Exeter in Britain. He was in the Devonshire Regiment. But the thing that really got to me as curious about reading this book is I thought, well, this might be kind of boring. And it was hard to read with all that calligraphy.
Right.
He titled his journal Memoirs of My Travels East. And you don't get into it very far before you realize he volunteered for French transport and trench warfare in France, but he spent about a week there. He somehow got injured. He didn't say wounded. Maybe he fell off a bar stool, but he got sent back to England. He recuperated, and this fellow signed up for another 3-year tour. And he went to Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, and then he went to India, and then he went back to Turkey. And it's like, what was there a war? Was there even a war there? Why did he get sent there? They never taught me that in school.
That was
Okay.
one of the things that I found fascinating. Was it was like, wow, I kind of knew about France.
Yeah, no, Archduke Ferdinand got assassinated. It was what my teacher called interlocking directorates. Everybody had treaties signed with each other, and it was just like a gang, a pile up. Okay,
Right.
in the trench war fighting in Europe, and this is the second time the Germans had tried to overtake France. The Franco-Prussian War had been very serious. They almost took Paris right before that, and actually caused and this is part of my book, the history, caused the French to run out of money because they'd been fighting the Germans for so long, and they sold the interest of the Suez Canal to the British, and the rest is history. Okay, because the Suez Canal, access to yesterday's headlines, the Persian Gulf. Okay, we can talk about that too, because all of the factors in that war have led to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And if you want, I'll tell you exactly why Putin invaded Crimea, and it has nothing to do with today's headlines.
Right.
Nobody will tell you this. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, but here's the thing. Leading up to the Festival of Books in Los Angeles, I did a fair amount of promotion, and one of the things that I do is I typically make at least one of my Kindle books free. And Amazon does let you do. Amazon hates free books, but they let you do it on EPUB, any of that distribution, Apple, Google, whatever. You can make a book free anytime, and so I've always got something free there. All right, so Sunday was a free day on Amazon because it's like exclusive Kindle on launch. Free day on Amazon. The book goes number 1, 1,500 audience members, downloads. Okay, free book, right? But here's a new audience, 1,500 readers who never knew, maybe they never knew who I was before. All right, but here's the thing. You have to tell Amazon, initially what your categories are. So, of course, I go historical fiction, and I go literary historical fiction. Mm-hmm. All right? But then, here's the good news, bad news to your authors out there. The Amazon robots are then going to shove you into whatever bucket they think you belong in. Right. Okay. My dear.
Don't tell me. What did they put you in?
On Sunday, the Amazon robots put me in romance historical fiction. Number 1. And I didn't have the guts to do that. Okay, I'm not Danielle Steele. Okay.
Well, yeah, and your book, though there is a romantic element.
There's 2 romantic subplots, one in the present, one in the past.
But they don't follow the romance trope. And so those people looking for historical romance would be ticked off because your book doesn't follow what they're looking for, right?
I will say, and also book reviewers have pointed this out, if you loved The English Patient, this is definitely very much a comparable. Right. And there were a bunch of other. Birdsong was the one that listed. There's some of them I haven't read that were listed as comparables. And Letters from Skye, that's another one. And one of the Alice, which I think probably refers to Australia. I know there's a book by the guy who wrote Schindler's List that talks about the Australians that fought in Gallipoli. Mm-hmm. And, the defense of Gallipoli, the offense against the Turks in Gallipoli was crucial to a lot of the war in Mesopotamia, which is something that we could talk about, because it had a lot to do with the reasons that the U.S. went into Iraq. It has a lot of the reasons why the Persian Gulf is being contested so much today. The whole British Empire in the Far East. I mean, ever since the British, and again, this is something I didn't remember from world history. The British had really been in India and very much of a powerful force since the days of Queen Elizabeth I, the British East India Company, 1640. Right. Okay. And one of the things that frosted what was left of my hair is I was watching, I believe it was like, and I have to admit, I'm on the free thinkers end of the spectrum. So I was watching free speech TV, and there was a former diplomat from Eastern Europe, And, one of my characters is
Right.
that, right? So I had to have some love interest in the present, and she's Ukrainian Russian, which also adds to the present day intrigue. But there was an Eastern, and I wish I could remember his name, but I believe he was Hungarian ambassador to the UN, something like that. But he had an accent. But he was saying I had to research this, and I found the target. The guy that he was quoting was William Dalrymple, who is a present day historian philosopher. And he said, people don't realize or understand what's going on with the rise of authoritarianism around the world. It's not our present president. It is not Orban. Well, I mean, he said this before, that guy went down in flames, but maybe he didn't go down in flames. I mean, the people who are holding those puppet strings didn't go away.
Right.
And
exactly.
that's true all over the world as well. I mean, Marie in France, and the current president of Italy, and whatever all, so, but the point being that Dalrymple has said, and this is the thing that, like I said, frosted my hair. He said the oligarchs. We could call this the age of oligarchs. The historians will say this is the beginning of the age of oligarchs. Is this going to last for 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years? He said oligarchs, their main thing is democracy is messy and it's starting to get in our way. Okay, yeah. Because we can't ask some government committee to wait a month to tell us what to do, because they can't even decide what color of paper to issue their memos on in that length of time. Okay, we want a decisive autocrat, and he might be a son SOB, but
that's fine.
But he tells people what it's going to be,
right?
And he tells people what we've decided he's going to tell them. Okay, I won't name names, but they're all behaving that way these days.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. But here's the analogy to the British East India Company. Queen Elizabeth I, 1640. The British East India Company was not, as one might think, if you remember anything from world history, which I didn't remember anything from this era, but I found out in the research and writing my book, is the British government didn't do that. The British government didn't have enough money to do that. British sailors had gotten all the way around to Calcutta, and then some bright people who were like, it was a century later before Samuel Johnson said, gentlemen, I'm going to let you know how to make money beyond the dreams of avarice. But that was what they were thinking.
Right.
Okay. There's stuff there that we can trade routes that we could sell. Right. And there are trade routes that go between Malabar in, present day Mumbai, back then Bombay in India. There's prevailing winds that go this way half of the year, this way half of the year. And the sailors from that time, they'd have a family
in each port.
In East Africa and the Indian Ocean, where I lived for a while, by the way. And then in one, and there's an Irish folk song. I left my love in Malabar. Okay, she's still standing there holding red roses on the beach. Okay, all right. So this was a sailor's life. This actually also goes back to ancient times, the sailors back and forth, and it goes back much further than you think. But the thing is, he said the oligarchs of today want to form the British East India Company again. And the best illustration of that came to mind, and I thought, what did I just see? And I go back to streaming series. Oh, I love that books stream now, because those are like chapters, like Dickens episodes in the old days. An author can, you can have a whole episode for a character. This is great. It's a whole episode for a subplot. When I wrote screenplays, it's like take a book that's 500 pages and make it 2 hours. Okay, what we used to call the Reader's Digest version. Right. Okay, all right. You don't have to do that anymore. People don't want to pay to watch that anymore. All right, so the oligarchs, British East India Company. I told you I'd come back to the point, right?
Yeah.
British East India Company is, watch, and I'll give you the specific episode. the night manager, one of my really honored mentors, John le Carré, taught me how spies are close observers, how George Smiley can remember the number of every license plate on the block before of the cars that are parked on his street, not because he wants to, but because he's been trained to do that. He's got a junkyard mind, just like you and me. There's an attic full of stuff you can use, right? But you don't know it's useful. That's how the close observers. But then John le Carré taught me close observers are readers. I'm training you how to read books. I'm training you how to read between the lines. And I'm also training you, get ready for this, geopolitics, how to read between the lines in today's headlines.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And this is why I will tell you, if you want to know why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and why he would probably settle for possession of the Crimea and the Donbass.
Because he doesn't, I was assuming that he wanted the port there because he needs a warm water port.
Russia will always covet warm water ports. Maybe you had the same teacher I did. It was the only thing I remember from seventh grade world history, but there's more. But let's
get back to your book.
Yeah, I know. I do British East India Company, because this is something that our listeners could tune in right after they watch the show. Okay, streaming Night Manager. It is the sequel to le Carré's book, supervised by his kids, grown adults, but as executive producers. So I think that they probably supervised the script as closely as John le Carré supervised the script for the first series, which he did. He was very actively involved in that. And all of his stuff that's been televised been very closely. It really has been very faithful to his stuff. I mean, Pat Patterson, the mystery writer, he complains that two of my books have been turned into movies. One of them, they kept the title, and the other one I didn't even recognize. So that guy has sold more mysteries than anybody on the planet, and yet he's complaining Hollywood,
takes his stuff and changes.
And that's true. That's true.
Right.
I live in Hollywood, and I will tell you, they have no legal obligation to even answer your calls if you sell them the rights to your book. So that's another story. Okay, but in the second season of Night Manager, episode 4, midway through episode 4, Dickie Roper, who is an illegal arms trader, multi-billionaire, and who's been more or less defeated in the first series because he wanted to sell poisonous sarin gas to the likes of dictators like Saddam Hussein and kill stadiums full of women and children besides enemies. He's been thwarted by the British MI6 with his hero. Okay. Jonathan Pine is the guy's fictional name. Anyhow, in season 2, he's come bouncing back by bribing his Syrian captors, and he has somehow managed to worm his way back into dark money and into the deep state of Great Britain and US and whoever else is paying for small arms shipments to insurgents. And so he's now graduating to be a global bad guy again. And he's having a meeting with his arch collaborator, Lord Sandy Sangborn, who's also an attorney, but also something of a black bureaucrat.
Okay. And
he's bragging to Sandy, and he says, back in the day when Brits ruled the waves, a fellow would wash up on a foreign shore, and he'd look around and he'd see, oh, there's minerals here. There's oil. There's olives, there's jute, there's rice. He and his boys would go ashore and they'd shoot a few locals and they'd load up their ships and they go back, and then they go back and plant. Then they go back with a lot more ships and they plant a flag, and they were in bloody business. And of course, Britain did that with,
Right.
and then,
Right.
then eventually got to be opium and rice and whatever, and then in World War One, in my story, one of the central elements of the story, why did my character go? Why was he stationed in India for a while? Well, it had to do with he was a trainer in riflery and then musketry, and I had to learn what musketry was, but it has to do with coaching squads of riflemen to attack and coordination, going back to muskets. Okay,
right.
When to load, when to fire. All right. So my guy was a trainer in musketry. Well, why was he there? There were no battles in India. Well, the problem was that many, many, many of the Indian men had been drafted into Indian Force D. They were their own uniforms, but they were part of the British Army. And they were sent to Mesopotamia for bloody day-to-day warfare with the Turks. The Turks were fighting on the side of the Germans, and mainly because their empire was going into the toilet, okay, right. and had been for 3 centuries, and that was what Europe was calling, and this was a major cause of the war. Europe was calling that the Eastern Question. Like when Turkey goes down, and what was then Constantinople, today present day Istanbul, the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, that narrow passage from the warm water Black Sea into the Mediterranean, when that goes into the void, who's going to rush in to take it?
Fill it. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now the British already had control of the Mediterranean with their gunboats and the British Navy. They had Palestine. They had most of Syria. They also had sailed through their Suez Canal, and they had taken control of southern present-day Iraq, around the city of Basra. Basra is right at the tip of the Persian Gulf. Okay, so if you can get to Basra, you can go out the Shat al-Arab River, which is kind of like as big as the Mississippi kind of thing, but it's not a seaport, but you can get out that river, out to the Persian Gulf. So if you can get somehow to Basra over land from Europe, you can get to the Persian Gulf, just like you could get to the Persian Gulf through the Suez Canal and then sailing around the tip of, to the Red Sea and sailing around the tip of to the Cape to get to the Persian Gulf. And Karg Island, which is where the super tankers for Iran hook up. And my father was the oil company executive who sold it back to the Revolutionary Guard. But that's another. And so I knew for a fact from firsthand at my father's knee that Karg Island was a really strategic place. So I thought, well, will that ever come back into the news?
Yes,
last week.
Yeah.
Last week. Please don't bomb the hell out of it, because then nobody will be able to sell oil from the Persian oil fields. So yes. So then in The Night Manager, Dickie Roper says to his partner, he says, and at the time, the whole reason for this episode and this particular series is he's planning to sell a weapon of mass destruction to a terrorist group in Colombia. And they're going to use that. The implication is it's a dirty bomb. It's not going to vaporize an entire city, but it's basically going to create so much terror that they're going to bring in a new authoritarian government. Okay. And so then once his investors in the world of dark money and in the dark bureaucracy of the British arms trade get control of that place, they're going to have control of an entire country. And then they're just basically going to be able to rape it on a daily basis. And so he shares this with Sandy, and he says, you know something? This is our new business model. We're going to do it here, and we're going to have control of this country in about 3 weeks. He said, if we can do it here, if the British Empire could do it, we can do it anywhere. And the one word that came to my mind, that popped in my mind right then, was Venezuela. They already did it. Cuba, they're going to do it. So if you need any proof that the oligarchs are pulling the string and not some specific politician, and even God love him, Vladimir Putin not the guy. I mean, yeah, it might seem that he holds the strings, and it might seem like he manipulates elections or does whatever the hell he does. But I will say that he learned when he took power in Russia that because the assets like oil, like natural gas, like whatever, were like too much for one person to manage, he had to kind of sell it off, to a few billionaires. Now, the guy that he sold the oil off to, I believe it was Rostov, was it? I don't remember his name. That guy got too big for his britches. It looked like he wanted to be premier, and so they shoved him into jail, and I think they eventually killed him.
Yeah.
Okay. And then people get thrown off buildings with regularity. But basically, what's going on in Moscow is, I'm from Chicago. I was in Chicago. I voted in Chicago when Mayor Daley the First ran that town the way that Putin runs Russia. Okay, and that was before that. It was Al Capone. It was the same. It was the same management style. Okay, you either do what I tell you, or you're going to end up in the lake. All right. Now, I don't know whether Daley ever did that. And, he had an honorable son who, whatever. And Chicago politics has been a very closed club ever since then. I believe it was Penny Pritzker. The Pritzker family owns Hyatt Hotels and Carnival Cruise Lines. Those are billionaires. And it was the Pritzkers who financed Barack Obama's campaign. We're not really talking about, the other side at this point, okay? And Penny Pritzker, then after being his campaign manager and bringing, millions of dollars into his campaign, ended up as Secretary of Commerce.
Right.
Okay. And then, is it her brother that's governor of Illinois now? So billionaire, but he's not an Orban, I don't think.
Right. Absolutely.
But again, it tends to be a small world with these folks. No, but I will say, I won't keep you in suspense much longer. But one of the things that I had to research for this story, and I know that when I was at Festival of Books, many of the visitors to my signing table were history buffs.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, because the book is very.
You're not gonna surprise me that it's the romance folks that walked up that surprised me. But I had equal opportunity, diversity. I had stimulating discussions with everybody, and so it was great. But one of the things I had to research British naval history. Because that was really the means of power. And Putin wants two things, and he's always wanted two things. And this is in a book by a retired U.S. admiral that I read, a naval commander. And he said Putin wanted two things. And this is his global strategy: control of oil and gas globally, and commanding the sea lanes into the indefinite future. If you want to know why the fossil fuel industry loves Vladimir Putin and made Rex Tillerson head of Exxon, Secretary of State under the first current president's administration. Tillerson didn't last very long, but Tillerson's agenda was one of the reasons that Putin's got a bee in his bonnet, to use a polite term, is that the sanctions have forbid oil exploitation in northeast Siberia, in the really frozen lands of Siberia. Mm-hmm. And one of the techniques that would really help that is oil exploration, fracking. Mm-hmm. Okay, the Romans, Freudian slip. The Russians really don't know how to do fracking very well. Exxon's really good at it. Okay, so Tillerson's assignment was to get the sanctions lifted and go in and get Exxon into there, and then very probably give whoever happened to be in the White House at the time a piece of the Russian owned oil company. So Tillerson didn't last because of his personality. And there was a guy, Tillerson knew checkbook journalism. I mean, Exxon, among the oil companies, when Exxon changed their name from Esso to Exxon, again, I know this because my dad worked for one of the others. He said, they had tried. My dad worked for Amoco, and the one of the unfortunate things was Amoco in Spanish sounded like vomit.
Oh, well, that's
okay.
not.
That's
unfortunate.
That was unfortunate for international marketing. Okay.
Yeah.
But then the Nova, Chevrolet Nova, when it sold in Argentina, when they introduced it down there, Nova doesn't go.
Oh, that's also unfortunate.
All right. So reportedly in the trade, in the industry, Exxon did all these computer analyses back then when it didn't take 2 seconds. They did all these computer for what name has no unfortunate meaning or pun in another language. And so my dad said, what do you think the double crossers at Exxon came up with? And they were known at the time to be not straight shooters.
Yeah. Double crossers.
Not and all of the oil companies. And I don't know. Well, we're not going to single out any, but I mean, I actually, I mean, I lived in Africa. I wrote a book about Harry Harambe's Kenyan Sundar about Kenya. I know a lot about Kenya and Kenya politics and corruption in African governments. But Liberia and Nigeria. I mean, the checkbook journalism is just like a daily thing there, and it's like trickled down. It's like, if you're in the upper class among the indigenous folks, what our woke scholars would call indigenous tribes, or no, indigenous communities. I can't say tribes anymore, but the problem is, and then I can't talk to any taxi driver in Nairobi. But there are good reasons for thinking that the British and Portuguese and others reinforced tribal distinctions to get them to fight each other, so they would be busy doing that. Yes, but I mean, they were right. One of the things I learned was that the Arabs, and again, we're talking about those trade winds across the Indian Ocean with those sailors that went back and forth. Mm-hmm. The Arabs were trading in slaves 2,000 years before Jesus. Okay,
right.
And so you had boats built by indigenous peoples in Lamu on the Indian Ocean. Those wooden boats were carrying their relatives over to become slaves in India and China. And then the British were taking Indians, but see, this didn't happen until again, this is about the time about the time of the East India Company. They were taking slaves from southern India and delivering them to South Africa to work sugarcane fields. And Michelle Benjamin, who's one of my dear colleagues, who's an author, she has a Indian African background, and her and some of her friends ancestors were slaves in the field of sugarcane,
right,
in South Africa. So I mean, you've got this whole world, this interconnected world, but you could say I've saved the best for later. But the real cause of World War I, real cause of Ukraine, is that, as you say, Russia covers warm water ports. The Eastern question, the demise of Turkey, something that all of the Europeans were concerned about, who's going to rush into there and take over geopolitics and the trade routes and whatever. The Germans had a plan that actually they'd been working on since they learned that the French were building the Suez Canal. They had a plan to build a railway between Berlin and Baghdad. That would have actually linked the deep water port of Hamburg or the port of Rotterdam, should they do that. That would have connected those deep water ports in the North Sea to the tip of Iraq, right, to Basra. So
which is brought up quite a bit in your book, this
Yes.
idea of the Eastern question.
what was
the
called
Eastern
the
question.
Berlin-Baghdad Railway.
Right.
The Berlin-Baghdad Railway was not completed. And the main reason it was not completed was because the British fought in Iraq in World War I. The thing was, like the Suez Canal, which there's the movie Disraeli, and you can read about Disraeli. Benjamin Disraeli, Prime Minister of Great Britain, bought the Suez Canal for £5 million, was it pounds, back in 1879 because the French ran out of money because of the Franco-Prussian War. And they had spent all their money on artillery and troops and whatever, just keeping the Germans at bay until Kaiser Wilhelm got tired and sent his troops. He said, I spent enough money on this. We'll conquer, France some other time. All right. And he came back. He was the one who came back with, a vengeance. So the British, it was British investors that had loaned the Bank of England that money to buy the Suez Canal. And then the Suez Canal, that was a major strategic port and domination of the Mediterranean by British gunboats and intimidation, Palestine, all that. Okay. But British investors, when they heard that about the Berlin-Baghdad Railway in 1879, they go, how can we get a piece of that? That's a really good idea. Okay, except that the admirals in the British Navy went, we just did the math, and that railway is going to be beyond the range of our gunboats.
And so therefore,
those nasty folks, more polite terms, are going to bypass the Suez Canal. They're going to try to take India. They're going to try to take China. They're going to take over all of our trade routes in the Far East of the Indian Ocean. We can't let that happen. That is the answer. That's their answer to the Eastern question. Right. They're going to dominate the Black Sea. They're going to dominate the Dardanelles, the access, and then and all through that. And then they'll and guess what they're also doing? They're building these new things called submarines.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is entertaining. The British Admiralty, again, leading up to the First World War, had debated among themselves, what are we going to do about submarines? Should we build submarines? They knew about them. Civil War, Monitor and the Merrimack. That it was suicide to be in a submarine at all. But the German submarine technology was about as advanced as anything could be in that era. Okay, and they were diesel powered. I don't think there were any coal fired submarines. And the British were just most of their boats were coal powered. Most of the steamships were coal powered. Oil was not really a thing in World War I. You really can't say. There were these things called automobiles, and rich people had them. But there was barely radio at the time, so nobody knew. We know what World War I and the French trenches were like because we saw all kinds of movies about it. Okay, Steven Spielberg, God bless him, doesn't want us to forget about why wars were fought. Okay, I honor him for that. Okay, he's done movies about all the wars, but the thing was, the British Admiralty said, "Oh, submarines, those are a coward's device. They'll only be used for defense." British,
and they were obviously quite wrong. Well, Gerald, I think we could have a discussion about history for hours and hours and hours on end. However, our hours are running low.
There's a sub base at the tip of the Crimea. It is one of Putin's 2 nuclear sub bases. Okay. If the Zelensky government tried to join NATO, the first thing NATO would say is throw those nasty folks out of there.
Right. So if someone wanted to get up with you, talk with you about your book, talk with you about Jonathan's journal, all of the different things that go on in there, why you would or would not classify it as a romance. What is the best way for them to get up with you, Gerald?
Oh, GeraldEverettJones.com is my website. And there's even, I believe there's the electronic review copies available there.
Super.
And I think Jonathan's journal is the review copy that's there at the moment. I'll have to recheck that, but all of my books are listed there, and then there's links over to Amazon. Everything's on Amazon, Kindle, paperback. Most of my books are on, except for Jonathan's journal, are on EPUB, Apple, Google, Kobo, all of those ebook platforms. And my Substack is Thinking About Thinking. Also, the ID there, Gerald Everett Jones, with 2 T's. Jerry Jones owns the Dallas Cowboys. Forget about that guy, not a relative. So, yeah, please do reach out. And historical errors, write me, please.
Yeah, I can imagine that you would be interested to find out about them. Absolutely.
Typos, absolutely. Not so much.
Not so much.
But I mean, and please don't, read between the lines, my dears.
Absolutely. So guys, I'll have everything in the show notes so that you can reach out to Gerald. And I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, Terry, I am glad to count you as a friend, a fan, a colleague, and a true professional in the podcast biz.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.